Good afternoon, viewers. My name is Nasiruddin. I am the Programs Officer of the Gambia Press Union. I'm the officer responsible for freedom of expression and labor rights at the union. Today I'll be your moderator for a discussion we are going to have on combating hate speech. To my left I have Mr. Madi Jobate, and to my right I have Mr. Famara Jani, and I'll give them a chance to introduce themselves and tell us what they do, their work here and their experiences. I start with Mr. Jobate.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, my name is Madi Jobate. I work in the field of human rights and democracy, promoting human rights and democracy in the civil society. That's what I do.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Jobate. Mr. Jaune, just yeah, brief introduction, what you do, what your organization does as well.
Oh, thank you very much, Mr. Dean. It's a pleasure to be here. Once again, my name is Famara Jani. I'm the Executive Director of Beakanyang organization. We are a human rights organization, and it's indeed a pleasure to be here with you all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The discussion is centered around a project, a combined project, a joint project done by the Gambia Press Union and Beakanyang with the support of the UNDP. The project, the title of the project was Combating Hate Speech, Social Bullying and Fostering Tolerance in the Gambia. As part of this project, the union commissioned a research report which was prepared by a consultant, and it was a research report on hate speech that's already been validated, and there are other activities also as part of the project. And I just wanted to ask you the first question, Mr. Jaume. Why have a project on hate speech?
Okay.
I mean, after I've read the research report, and one of the first lines that struck me is that it stated that Gambia is a tolerant society. We don't have a history of any tensions, religious, ethnic tensions. So then, on this backdrop, I mean, why have a project, a whole project on hate speech?
Well, thank you very much. We all know countdown to the December 4th presidential elections in the Gambia is seemingly becoming, I don't know how can I describe it, but the issue of hate speech has now become a cause for concern for all of us. And therefore, perhaps, yeah, we could have a tolerant society, but of late we've seen the incidents of hate speech all over. And therefore, I think that's one of the motivations why our organization and the Gambia Press Union decided to come up with this project idea to engage Gambians, to focus on issues-based politics rather than hate speech, to focus on how our politicians can discuss on policies that can improve the lives and livelihoods of the Gambians, as opposed to us insulting each other's tribe, insulting each other's religion, insulting each other's political party leaders here and there. So yes, it is indeed a cause for concern, and that is one of the motivations why we decided to come up with the idea to see how best we can engage Gambians wherever we may be, as to how best we can definitely redirect our focus on issues-based politics than politics of insult, politics of tribalism, politics of all religion here and there. We've seen all these things are happening of late. So we thought it's important that we do this, because we've seen how the issue of hate speech affected the development of some countries. You know of the Rwandan genocide, and many countries that definitely pay a huge price as a result of hate speech. So we don't want to go there. We don't want to wait until such things happen in our country. So we are taking mitigation strategies, and one way of doing that is to engage Gambians, to definitely discuss what we could do as Gambians to ensure that, like I said before, we focus on policies and forget sentiments and stop the insult of tribes, religion here and there, and then focus on policies. And basically that's the main reason why we decided to come with this initiative.
Okay, and just further to that, people listening or watching this program might say, okay, then what is hate speech? And Mr. Jowate, being a human rights expert, can you just give us, and having been part of this project, at least having been able to review the research report, can you please give the viewers an insight as to what is hate speech, or what you believe hate speech is.
Yeah, thank you. Essentially, hate speech is about making derogatory remarks, comments or speech about or against someone purely on the basis of the person's ethnicity or race or religion or disability. And these things have expanded as societies evolve, so that in some countries they would even identify the various identities of people, that if you make derogatory remarks based on those identities, it tantamount to hate speech. So age, for example, has come to be one of those identities in certain places. In some places, sexual orientation has become one of those identities, or sexual identity itself, and so on and so forth. So basically, it is making a negative comment about a person based on the person's identity. And of course, sometimes such comment may not generate violence against that person or anywhere, but in many instances it can also lead to incitement to violence against such people. But in any case, hate speech, it dehumanizes the individual. It damages the right and the dignity of the person. And hate speech has been one of the tools where you have instances of genocide. If one recalls in, whether it's Rwanda or whether it was Germany during the Second World War, how the Nazis described the Jews, or how the Hutu government in Rwanda described the Tutsis, cockroaches, we call them tall trees. You have to cut down the tall trees because the characteristics of the Tutsi are normally tall people. Because what hate speech does, it alienates the person, from the rest of society as if they are different and they are harmful, and they are dangerous, they are not clean, So that's the kind of things that hate speech generates around a person, and therefore you alienate the person from the rest, or you alienate the rest from that person, so that they don't associate. And if you are able to alienate them, it is when you also create environment for people to use violence, because people will want to say, okay, since we are different from them and they are bad, they are negative, they are all of that, they are dangerous, so we can kill them. So even therefore in genocide analysis, you will realize that hate speech, such language of alienation, is very common in it. And so in the Gambia, as Mfamara was talking about, how the kind of language we are using now, it may not all reflect hate speech, but certainly gross intolerance, political intolerance. And you started the discussion with a line that there is political intolerance in the Gambia.
Yes,
something like that.
Yeah, I started a line because the research report in its introduction stated that the Gambia is a tolerant society.
Exactly.
So I asked them, why have a research report on hate speech after acknowledging in your report that the Gambia is a tolerant society?
So not just this research. I think generally all of us Gambians, we say we are a tolerant society. Yes. I mean, that is the notion we have. But this research is very important and timely, because like all other societies, we are also evolving. Gambia 5 years ago, 15 years ago, 25 years ago, and today things are evolving, changed. There was a time we would sit in the Bantaba, in the Atayavu, and discuss at the coin. But today we have social media. We don't even have to be together, yet we can have a conversation together. You can send one word and it cuts across. It's 2021. Apart from that, people are going out to the rest of the world. The rest of the world are coming here. People are getting educated. So technology, economy, society itself. So a lot of changes are taking place. And so things we may have taken for granted in the past, we cannot continue to take those things for granted until now. And political intolerance actually has been here. It is just that it may not have led to a tribal war like in other countries, or conflict in other countries, sort of. And so when we have politics, there may not have been political violence as we would see in other countries. So it all gives the impression it's a very tolerant society. But when one pays attention to the words we use at home, as friends, when we sit against a particular tribe or a particular religion or a particular individual, you know, I remember as a young person growing, you would see somebody with a disability, you would tell the person that's why God made you this way. That's hate speech. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So, and we have very serious stereotypes, prejudices. You know, any ethnic group that sits around, you know, if you belong to the same ethnic group, you realize we may make comments about, you know, other groups, the words that we normally take to be normal, you know, kayelemo. We see this in Mandinga, kayelemo lo world. The word will say like a cat. You know what I'm saying? So all of this was that some of them may not be really hate speech or so, but the connotation really is about difference. And these are the things that escalate to the point that we had even a president here who stood in Telinding and, you know, said the an ethnic group, the Mandinka are dogs or you know, more or less like cockroaches, they should be killed, something like that. So when you begin to have that language come to this point, it all the more justifies that it is high time we bear in mind this issue of hate speech, political intolerance, and within the whole context of human rights, bearing in mind the experiences of societies around us, around the rest of the world. So I think the research is pretty relevant, important, and it came at the right time that we have a conversation among ourselves that there are a lot of things we pass off. It's actually hate speech. We should not be saying these things, and they happen until today.
That's a very important point, and for me as an advocate for freedom of expression, I would like to pose these questions to both of you. First, Mr. Jaune, and then I would like your opinion on this as well. The right to free speech or freedom of expression. Some people say the right to free speech includes the right to be offensive, right? And then my question here is, where do you draw the line between free speech, which includes the right to be offensive? In the past few weeks, we've seen, I don't know if you've been following it online, there's this comedian who was very offensive to some members of the LGBT group, and people were defending his right to be offensive. It's part of his free speech. It's part of his right to freely express himself. In the Gambia, it's also a constitutionally protected right in Section 25 of the Constitution. So where do you draw the line between free speech and hate speech, or are there any objective standards that you may use to identify or separate free speech from hate speech? So, Mr. Jaune, I would like you to, you know.
Well, as far as I know, hate speech is not free speech. Yes, freedom of expression is fundamental human rights, but essentially where your right to expression stops is where someone's right starts. So we cannot take things for granted and say hate speech could be considered as free speech, because remember, we're talking about right to free expression, but at the same time it's about the right of other people. It's about the right to other people. Now when we you know, use hate speech against people, you know, a particular ethnic group, a particular religious group, or people based on their sexual orientation here and there, we are mocking them, like Madi explained. You know, we are dehumanizing them, you know. So with all those type of things, obviously you cannot express yourself because it's your right to express. At the same time, you are taking away from somebody. I don't know where to understand.
Yes, but the question is, some people, yes, some academics have tried to differentiate offensive speech from hate speech. Yes. So that's my question here. Where do you draw the line? It's difficult. It sometimes sounds a bit subjective. But yes, for you, yes, where do you think the line should be drawn? Or are there any objective standards where you can differentiate offensive speech which some have argued is protected under free speech, and then hate speech?
Well, I may allow Madi to come in at this stage, but my argument is the same. That is, we cannot use hate speech in the replacement for as an excuse for free expression. If people are allowed to express themselves, it's guaranteed by the Constitution, it's guaranteed by Universal Declaration of Human Rights and all other international conventions and treaties. But hate speech, in other way around, cannot be considered as a defensive speech or whatsoever. No.
Okay, thank you.
But like I said, I want Madi to come on this stage.
By international human rights laws, standards, freedom of expression is the right to receive and impart information by any means and across borders. And this includes the expression of opinion or statements that could be offensive. But certainly offensive speech is not hate speech. Hate speech would definitely be offensive, and it is hate speech. But offensive speech may not necessarily be hate speech. So as I said earlier, hate speech is basically, derogating or, speaking negatively about a person or a group on account of their identity, whatever that identity is. So that when you face a person and, his or her identity is a Muslim, or a Christian, or he's a person with disability, or he's a Mandinka or Fula or Jola, and insult that person for that would be hate speech. That insult his or her group, for whatever he or she has done, or however you see him, and said, this is why Mandinkas are this or that. That is hate speech. But then offensive speech is speech that is not necessarily hateful, all right? It's not hateful, but you can feel offended by it, and so if I should make a comment, say I had a conversation with God, and you are a religious person, you may find that very offensive. How can Madi say that? You see, if I should face your, political leader and criticize that, your political leader or the Gambia government is corrupt, and you are a supporter of Gambia government, or that political leader is corrupt, things like that, you may feel offended. The person may feel offended by that statement, but it is not hate speech, and so that is the difference. So the objective standard really in terms of hate speech would be speech that actually seeks to speak negatively of the identity of the person, to make a speech against a person based on his or her identity. So basically that would be the difference. But in speech also has gone further to say there is also what is called dangerous speech. So you can even put them into three elements: hate speech, dangerous speech, and offensive speech. So that dangerous speech, which usually comes within the political context, would be statements that people make on the political platform, that is not hateful, but it has the potential to create division in society, and of course certainly it would be offensive. So that if I should get up and say, this particular group are the ones who voted for that leader, or sort of blaming them for that is dangerous speech. It is not necessarily hateful speech, and it's within freedom of expression, but then it is speech that can potentially cause a backlash, because people in that group may want to respond, or somebody from that group may want to respond in a certain way, and so you have the potential to undermine peace and stability. So there is also dangerous speech, that is also prevalent. And when you follow our political discourse in this country, when you follow social media discourse in this country, you would see hate speech, you would see dangerous speech, and you would see offensive speech. I mean, all of these things are there, you know, which we need to bear in mind. So we need more education, you know, on these things, so people understand them, so that we adjust ourselves. And you know, in development work, when HIV/AIDS came, people were saying certain words about killer disease, but we came to that that's a good, appropriate language. You know, persons with disability. Now you hear people say persons with differently able persons, because also we want to speak appropriate language. So in our political discourse also, it is high time we raise this issue, so we speak appropriate language, language that will be absent of hate or dangerous or offensive speech. It enhances democracy and, you know, protects rights better.
Yes, and speaking of language, the report recommends legislation, like that hate speech should be legislated. And I don't know if you have come across the criminal offences bill, I think section 58, which talks about it. Do you believe that the language that provision was couched in is appropriate to addressing hate speech? I could go through some of the provisions. I mean, in section 58, sub 58C of the criminal offences bill, which says that before the public at large incites any person who before the public at large incites hatred against any national, ethnic, racial or religious group commits an offense. So is that enough? Is that sufficient, or is there more? Is there a better language to capture it?
Okay, so I think that is sufficient enough, because we are also thinking of in the line of a situation whereby, you know, many countries, even though people would have recommended for a legislation against hate speech, many countries do not have one, simply because we also trying to draw a balance here that, you know, politicians are not predictable. You know, we don't want them to use this instrument against the people, you know, from expressing themselves. So that is why first and foremost we need to have, we're planning to have this national conversation, to have what we term as hate speech in Gambian context. Because what could be hate speech in the Gambia might not be hate speech in America, for instance, depending on the circumstances and the context, you understand? So, and the socio-cultural context as well. Or perhaps what may be a dangerous speech we could consider as dangerous speech here may not be a dangerous speech in another part of the world. So what I'm trying to drive at here is that in as much as we are trying to advocate for a legislation, we also have to be very careful in the sense that we don't provide a room for infringement of people's rights by politicians or by sitting governments. So in a sense, what I'm trying to say is that you remember the attempt by the government to bring in the legislation whereby if you insult the president or president's mother or the ministers, you know, you could be, you know, liable for an offense. You remember that? Yes. So what we're trying to run away from is that a legislation that is not going to be there to suppress people from expressing themselves, also not a law that is there to protect only few people. You understand? So if we are to have it, I have no problem with having it. So and again, if this is not sufficient, if we are to have more stringent measures, we need to have a law that no one will be seen as this is meant for protection of only the elites, but it has to protect everyone. And again, it should not also undermine people's right to free expression as well. So we have to draw the balance. We have to draw the balance in any case, that people's right to free expression should be guaranteed, but there should be limitation. And again, if we are to have such a law, it should not be a law just to protect the elites and their families or their parents, but everyone else. That's my opinion anyway.
That's very important, and even for the media. If we are going to have a hate speech law, will it impact the media's right to freely express, publish things? And just to switch into that now, Mr. Mali, I would like to ask you, the report talked about some of the hate speech incidences that was published or that were published by many media houses. it also identifies that one of the major sources of hate speech is radio call-ins, like people calling into radios and making certain incendiary remarks that may be characterized as hate speech. Is there any way to regulate that? A few months ago, I think Pura was trying to come up with some regulations, broadcasting regulations. And one of the things that they recommended was delaying devices for radio stations. Is there any other thing they could do in addition to that? Or do you even agree with Pura being involved in the regulation of media houses to curb against hate speech?
Yeah, so I had completely condemned and that action or attempt by Pura. I don't think Pura or any agency should be responsible to regulate content, broadcast content. Otherwise, we are going to face serious infringements. Rather, these things, one is a matter for the Gambia Press Union to provide the necessary training to media houses, to journalists, to understand the nature of speech. Secondly, it is for individual media houses as well to also make sure they build the capacity of their workers to understand the nature of speech, but also to have internal regulations. What I have noticed in most of our media houses, particularly the broadcast, houses, you don't have internal code of conduct, or policy guidelines, not just the radio or television stations, but even the newspapers. How many of them have editorial policies? All right, policies that would take care of issues of gender, of children, of disability, and other identities, so that in programming, like phone-in programs or discussions like this, you are able to make sure appropriate language is utilized. So I think each and every media house should have those codes of conduct, policies to guide these things. GPU itself, as a body responsible for the media, should have its own code of conduct. I agree with Famara. We cannot have law which protects one sector of the population and not the other on a matter like this. And to say to bring legislation on hate speech is a complex thing, or on speech generally. Democracies, major democracies around the world protect the freedom of expression. Some democracies, like the US, went to the point to even say no power can even take away that right of freedom of expression. So there is practically no law in the US that regulates speech. So that, but again, if you go to some other democracies, let's say in Europe, you would find democracies such as Germany criminalizing, let's say Holocaust denial, all right, and so on. Now, for me, some of these things are political issues. They have to be addressed politically, which means the government itself has to adjust itself to ensure they use appropriate language. We have seen the president, ministers, parliamentarians at different times use language that is offensive and that is dangerous, and that is even hateful. If you consider some of the remarks former President Jammeh was making. So the government itself, or government agents, have to speak appropriate language, but also political parties, right? Because they all come from political parties. So political parties themselves have to have their own codes of conduct, so that on their political platforms, individuals are not going to hold the mic and engage in hate speech, offensive speech, and dangerous speech. And that is also a reality in this country. You have seen political rallies where people hold the mic, from the political leaders to their surrogates, to their supporters, to key members who have expressed very dangerous, offensive, and hateful speeches. So for me, these are the ways we can take to address this matter, such that if a political leader or a person makes a hateful speech, especially somebody holding significant position in society, one would expect each and every political party to condemn that. If it happens in the media, one would expect the media houses GPU to condemn that. So that kind of political approach, for me, is the best way to deal with it, bearing in mind you don't want to use law, and it becomes difficult because even when we say hate speech, somebody makes a speech, how do we really set the indicators to qualify this is hate speech? Some may be very obvious that this is really hate speech, this is offensive speech, but some may be a debate, really. I mean, some may feel this is not hate speech, some may feel that is hate speech. So if I should say what the president said is untrue, is false, the president has lied, now to somebody that is offensive, but to another person that is not offensive within the broader context of democracy, of freedom of expression. And so if you want to bring law, you now have problem really to determine where to place this particular speech. And this is why in democracies also laws, what they call insult laws, sedition laws, are supposed to be not there, because what is considered seditious speech or insult speech, you know, in a democracy, like in our criminal code, there are a lot of comments we make, even here, we've made when you really want to use the criminal code. You could say we have all violated this, made a seditious statement, you know, because practically it is saying any statement that makes, put the government in bad light. That, you know, so if you criticize government, essentially, according to our criminal code right now, you are making a seditious statement, you know, and that undermines democracy and human rights, and that is unacceptable in a country like this or in any democracy.
So I just want to ascertain this. You have a different position from Mr. Jaune that hate speech should not be legislated.
Yes, I don't think hate should be legislated. Yeah.
So if not legislated, what ways do we, if not legislated, regulated, do we leave it to the courts? Do we leave it to people to probably sue if they feel that?
But there is libel and slander, for example. So if I speak negatively about you at a personal level, accuse you in a certain way, you can take me to court, you know, as a civil matter, because you know, it's libel and slander. If any newspaper reports something, you may take the court as an individual. But to say there's a law that there should be no hate speech, you know, I know even myself, I get conflicted with it. Sometimes I'm like, yeah, but I think we need something like that, because, you know, some of the comments people make are really offensive and hateful. But when I sit down again to think deeply about it, I look at the benefits versus the cost. If we should have it, how much would it cost us? If we don't have it, do we have other ways to address it? And that's why I said we can address it through political means, through education, through self-regulation, you know, by political parties, by the media. You know, if we all do that, you know, I remember, which is not hate speech, but anyway, offensive speech, in the US Congress, President Obama was speaking, delivering his State of the Union address some years ago, and a congressman, you know, shouted at him and said, "You lie." Now, of course, that's offensive. He has a right to express his opinion. That's his opinion, that the president is lying. But, you know, again, as human beings, as a civilized society, we should have decorum and respect for it. So you don't need to interrupt at that point in that manner. And he wasn't arrested because, of course, the American Constitution protects that kind of speech anyway, no matter how offensive it is. But what happened, you know, his party, Republican Party, and other politicians, political parties, came to condemn until the guy had to withdraw and apologize for that comment. That's many years ago, but just this year or last year, there is this popular Republican parties, I think it's a senator or so Majority Taylor Greene. You know, she made some remarks that border on the Holocaust on Jews, making certain comparison. The Republican Party leaders came to also condemn, because that speech was considered to be hateful. All right, and she apologized and withdrew her comments. So that kind of political approach, would be very good. Now, in the Gambia, that is what doesn't exist here, because politicians makes very hateful, dangerous and offensive comments. Their own party don't condemn it. In the first place, the parties don't even have a code of conduct. No other party or political leader would say that comment by this political party leader or supporter is offensive or is dangerous, is hateful. We are condemning that statement. So, and then nobody withdraws those comments. And I don't think that is helpful. We have to cleanse our political culture, our political environment. Otherwise, I mean, yeah. But law, I may not say outright no, but I'll be very cautious to bring law into regulating speech. Yeah, in this manner. Yeah.
Mr. Johanna, do you have a retort to that? Since you understand that it can be legislated.
No, I made it very clear since the onset that in any case, even whereas we are to advocate for a law, it should be a law that is inclusive of everyone, meaning it doesn't come to favor only few. I said that earlier on. Mm-hmm. And I also said it should not be a law that will also infringe on people's right to free expression. Mm-hmm. So it's left to the Gambian people. If they prefer law, and later on I will discuss some of the feedbacks that we get from the people, the ordinary people in the communities with regards to hate speech. But then if Gambians want it, so it be. But what is more important is that as far as I'm concerned, it should not be a law that is here to favor only few people. It should not also infringe on people's right to free expression.
Yes. And just following to further what you've said, what you've talked about, the feedback from the people, that was going to be my next question on some of the activities you've been engaged in to addressing hate speech. I've seen some of your project documents. There are a lot of activities you were engaged in, especially in the communities. So, but can you please give us an insight into some of those activities and some of the takeaways you got from them?
Yeah. So, like you rightly said at the beginning, this is a joint initiative by Beakanyang and the Gambia Press Union. So we had a series of engagements at community level. We had town hall meetings in all the administrative regions of the Gambia. We had engagements with teachers, students, adolescent girls. So, and radio programs are also going on. Journalists are also being trained, and these type of programs as well, TV programs. So basically, yes, like I said, also we are also meeting community influencers. We are training them, national influencers, and there's going to be a national dialogue as to probably we want to discuss what we could be considered as hate speech in Gambian context, putting into consideration our socio-cultural realities. But communities actually are also concerned about the issue of hate speech, especially towards the countdown to the elections. People are very much concerned about it, and they are also worried that if the trend continue, it could undermine peaceful elections in this country that we are yearning for. So yes, the issue of proposed legislation topped the agenda in almost all the regions that we visited, when people are recommending for remedial action or coping mechanisms or strategies that we could take. The issue of legislation is always on top of the list. Almost in all regions of the Gambia, the people are proposing that perhaps that could be the best way out. But people are also blaming the political leaders, like Mari said here, political leaders. They should take responsibility. You are at a political rally or a platform and your supporters are insulting other tribes or other religions or other political party leaders. Those kind of hate speeches and dangerous speeches, and you still feel comfortable listening to those things. So people in the regions are not happy with all those things, and they believe that the leaders definitely should come out and condemn. If their supporters are to use hate speech against other people, they should speak up. So they blame the political party leaders for also not living up to their responsibility.
Yes, as part of your activities also, you're also involved with training adolescent girls and also teachers. So why that? Is there hate speech happening in schools? I found that part very interesting.
Yes, so if you read the project document well, it is trying to address three things. One is about hate speech, and the second one is about social bullying. We know the issue of bullying in schools. So many students drop out of school because of bullying. Some didn't perform well academically because of bullying. So, but finally, and the third one, which is the overall goal, is to have peaceful elections in this country. So the engagement with the students, school authorities, and the teachers is mainly not only about hate speech per se, but it's about social bullying in particular. You know, how we can make school environment more comfortable, more conducive for the students, for learning to take place. You know, so that no one will be bullied based on whatever your status is in the school, to feel more comfortable to learn, because it's also an issue that we are confronted with in this country, as alluded to by the school authorities. They've acknowledged in the regions that it's an issue that we should not just leave it like that. It needs attention of stakeholders like our organizations to help students know what bullying is all about in the school environment, and how teachers could contribute towards addressing the issues of bullying, and how students can feel comfortable to report incidences of bullying in the school, so that we can have an environment that is more conducive for learning. So basically it's about that.
Thank you very much for that insight, Mr. Jaune. Mr. Jobate, I just wanted to ask, in addressing hate speech, now we're talking about addressing it, are there any countries we can learn from? Do you have any insights from other countries, whether in Africa or even overseas, Europe, America, Asia, that we can learn from? Is there any country that has addressed hate speech in a way that you think could be emulated here in the Gambia?
Wow, that would be difficult to identify. I'm not sure any country has effectively dealt with it. You know, and the countries that I know that are handling it is in two ways, either with law or without any law, you know, but with a high human rights culture, you know, a high culture of intolerance, such that the incidence of hate speech reduced, because these things are also socio-political. And so if you look at some of those democracies I've mentioned, say in Western Europe, particularly Scandinavia and so on, the level of political awareness, particularly the awareness around inclusion, about equality, non-discrimination, which they have fused into their laws, into their, you know, school education system, and, you know, across the board, in such a way that it's become very difficult for people to make hate speeches, even though it happens. And so when it happens, usually you would see massive, you know, protests against it, you know, from across society. You know, so in those countries, whether it's UK or France or Germany and so on, in democracies like that, politicians, that's one of the greatest nightmares they could have, to make a hateful speech. And in many instances, what we've seen is politicians are forced to come back to apologize, to retract their statements, because they make sure, the society makes sure there is risk, there's consequence. That if you make this hateful speech, you'll pay a price for it, politically. And so it has served to, you know, restrain or to discipline not only politicians, but the rest of society. And I mean, having lived, been in these societies myself, I can see that. You know, I can see that kind of culture there, that, you know, people are very sensitive to making remarks or gestures that are racist or, you know, tribal, that are, you know, bigotry generally. People, you know, tend to check themselves very much in order to not make those things. But that is not to say they don't happen, you know, because, you know, those things happen still. So except if it is in the case of violence, of course, there will be law against violence. But in terms of speech, other sanctions may follow, not necessarily from the courts, but I mean, if you make those comments in a community, in a supermarket, I mean, we've seen certain gestures happen in supermarkets in the US, for example, racist. And what has been the backlash? Yeah. So if anything, what Gambia should just learn from those countries is a culture of tolerance, by everyone, and everyone to be interested, to be committed to learn about human rights, to appreciate the value of humanity, which means to seek to uphold, to promote the culture of tolerance, of non-discrimination, of equality, of inclusion. Every day, passing through this, living in this country, in the family, in the community, at the workplace, on the beach, at the market. I mean, I see, I hear, hateful speeches, offensive speeches all the time, and people just laugh about it. Because this is also what people know. So we are not alarmed by those things. I have experienced certain remarks by people in certain places. Shocking, So law, before law comes, I think we do the education, the sensitization, but also encourage entities to regulate themselves. And in our context right now, given the political environment, with the social, cultural background to it, I think we should demand that political parties, more than anyone, regulate themselves. They have a code of conduct, they have policies on gender, on disability, and other identities in terms of speech, so that when they have a rally, a gathering anywhere, there's a code of conduct guiding that gathering in terms of speech. If we are able to successfully make political parties take this matter more, I think it will help. It will help to change the whole country, because political parties, at the end of the day, they are the most dominant group in our society, because a political party has all ethnic groups in it, has all religious bodies in it, has all persons of all sorts of categories. And a political party is what runs the government. They are the ones in the parliament, they are the ones at the executive. So if you change the political party, you create a certain culture within a political party, effectively you change society as a whole in itself. So so dealing with hate speech, and of course bearing in mind all this hate speech, the tribalism we talk about, the political intolerance, the insults we talk about in this country, is from the political parties. Of course, no party would say we sanction this, we allow our members to insult, and every party would say, in fact, our leader went to condemn it, our leader advised us not to insult. But at the same time, those who are insulting on social media, in the political rallies, claim to be members of those parties. And they may not be elected members, they may be insignificant members at the end of the Gambia or somewhere in China. But they claim to be members of this party. Has the party taken any effort to say, look, here is our published code of conduct on speech. If you are a member of this party, this is the code of conduct that we abide by. If you violate it, we are hereby sanction you not to speak in the name of our party again. All right? This comment you make, withdraw it and apologize. If you fail to do so, we dismiss you out of our party. Let one party do that right now and see what's going to happen. But no party is doing it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jobate, for that. And I would really love to continue this conversation, but we are running out of time. So I call on you, Mr. Jaune, just to give some closing remarks on maybe some words of encouragement to the general public on how we can all together combat hate speech, for the good of our nation.
Thank you very much. Again, I would like to thank UN Peace Building Fund through UNDP for supporting the initiative and our organizations that are involved in this together. Having said that, I also want to remind all of us as Gambians that I always say this, and everyone said this, that we have no other place other than the Gambia. And in order for us to enjoy our country, we have to ensure that we maintain peace in our country. And to maintain peace, we should stay away from issues relating to hate speech. It's unfortunate that people are taking that train when we should have, like I said at the beginning, focus on issues, focus on policies, but unfortunately people are taking that route. So I encourage every Gambian to desist from issues related to hate speech, and we maintain peace at all times, and I hope that we're going to have peaceful elections at the end of the day.
Thank you very much, Mr. Johnny. Mr. Jubate, any closing remarks?
Well, to buttress the points Mfamara just highlighted, peaceful elections, but also a peaceful society, you know, a tolerant society, a society where it's inclusive, without discrimination, exclusion of anyone on account of anything, you know, and it's about respect, you know, oneself and the other. So, you know, so more than anything, I think anyone engaged in hate speech, you essentially are just highlighting the fact that you don't have respect, value for yourself in the first place, and that's why you engage in hate speech. Because if you engage in hate speech against someone, you naturally would expect a response, a reaction. And if you don't want anyone to speak negatively about you, particularly your identity, you don't speak negatively about somebody else's identity. So the fact that you can do that, it means you don't care about your own dignity as a human being. So this is a matter that each and everyone just need to take time to reflect. What is the meaning of this speech? Why would I make this speech? So that if we reflect on that, we will realize that just because I have a different opinion from you, I don't have to bother whether you are a man or a woman or a Fula or Jola or Christian or Muslim or with a disability or not. I'll just deal with the issue on the table, and we can disagree on that. So I think at the beginning, Vamara talked about issue-based politics. So we engage in something like that, than to begin to look at, you know, your face and, you know, describe you when the issue is on the table. So so what I would tell citizens really and people, let's value ourselves. Let's have self-esteem and value ourselves and consider ourselves as a leader in this country. Leaders are not the elected and appointed people at State House in the National Assembly or our party leader, our party executive members. No. The leaders are you and me. Every citizen is a leader. Leadership by action, by your commitment, by upholding those humanistic values. And that's all about human rights. It's about those values of fairness, of justice. So if we uphold those things, then you are a leader in the society, because you are making, you are not breaking, you are making. And leaders need to make, you know, need to build, leaders need to, you know, advance society. So that's what I would like to end with here.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jubate. Thank you very much, Mr. Jowney. And thank you all for joining us for this program. We hope you enjoyed it. We hope you learned from it. Yes, now we've come to the end of it. So thank you all for joining us.